Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. I'm Jonathan Hansen, Chief Creative Officer at Unconquered, and I'm your host of Conquer the Noise. Today we're talking with Janie Heuck, Managing Director at Brooks Winery. I'm really excited to share this one with you, especially for all you wine lovers and nerds out there. In this episode, we talk about how the loss of her brother, Jimmy, who started the winery, has fueled the business with passion and purpose. We talk through biodynamic farming, geek out on wine, and how focusing on what's important like family and community creates a business that supports their people. Janie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited too. I'm a big wine nerd, so I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I've tasted your wines, and I was first introduced to your wines when I was at the 1% for the Planet conference in Portland. I think it was last year.
It was last year, yeah.
Did you go or did you attend?
I was there, yeah. I had 3 or 4 people from my team that helped me pour that night so that I could mingle and get to know people, but I was there for the whole conference. It was great.
And what wines were you pouring that night?
We poured the Rastaban Pinot Noir, which is from our estate vineyard, and then we also poured the estate Riesling.
Okay. Yeah, I remember tasting the Pinot. I don't think I've had the Riesling yet. But I was reading through your background a little bit, and it sounds like a really interesting transition for you, going from, seems like a very finance-heavy, working in the back end of business, to now running a winery, which I'm sure is a whole nother ballgame. I would love to hear how you got introduced into wine and talk through that.
Yeah, it's a good story for sure. I started my career, I was an accounting major. When I got out of college, I went to Arizona State, got my CPA, ended up dating my boss, and therefore had to leave the department and got put into the healthcare consulting department for one of the big 8 firms. So really got into healthcare at that point from a financial modeling standpoint. This was back in the mid-90s and later 90s. And that led me to a company that I helped start up, actually. It still exists today, which is so fun. It's called Silver Sneakers. And it was a great startup company. Loved it. And after we were in business for about 5 years, my husband got the opportunity for a job of his lifetime in California. So we moved to California. I decided to be a stay-at-home mom because I had a little girl at that time. And 4 years into that, my brother, who we were born and raised in Portland, he graduated from college, moved to Europe, didn't know what he wanted to do for a living, and ended up working Harvest in Beaujolais for 6 years. Got married, had a baby, and decided to come back to the United States. So he got a job in wine country in the Willamette Valley. And after about 4 years in that position in business, he passed away unexpectedly at the age of 38 on a Saturday morning during harvest. And I really didn't know. I knew nothing about wine. I knew a little bit about his winery, but it was tiny. He had only had 4 vintages by that point. And I flew from California the night that he passed away and got sat down by a bunch of winemakers from the Willamette Valley who said, they wanted to do a couple things. They explained to me that harvest was coming. It was just a few weeks away. And that they wanted to make sure that all the growers that my brother was purchasing grapes from had their contracts met. They felt that was super important part to support their community. And they also said that, my brother talked about the winery was really the only thing he had as a legacy to leave to his son. So those 2 things combined, they decided to offer to take my brother's fruit that year for harvest and make the wine for free, and asked me to get involved in the business side. I had to say yes. Our parents had passed away 4 years prior. I was his only sibling, and he was no longer married to his wife. So it was really just him and his 8-year-old son. So I was going to have to do something with all of his belongings anyway. And going through that process, and coming from competitive healthcare, I was so taken by the kindness and the passion and the generosity of the Oregon wine community And then you combine that with my last name and my family's winery. And here's my brother's 8-year-old son who now owns a winery, and just decided to try to keep it going. So I've been doing this for 15 years now. Lucky to be anchored with our assistant winemaker, Chris Williams, who was my brother's winemaker. So he's actually been with the brand for 20 years. He's been with it longer than I have. So that's how I got here.
Wow, that's an emotionally charged entrance into wine for sure. When your brother was in Beaujolais doing harvest, was he more working in the fields, or was he actually involved in like the winemaking process?
Both. He was working for Domaine de Champs. They made Pinot Noir, Gamay, and Chardonnay, and he worked for the same place all 6 years. And that he learned about biodynamic farming when he was there. So that was one of the things that he brought back when he started his winery in Oregon. He also spent a lot of time in Alsace and really fell in love with Riesling and other aromatic whites. So when he launched into the Oregon wine industry, he came in making a little bit of a statement by bringing biodynamic farming and committing to restoring the reputation of Riesling in the Willamette Valley.
So he's really a pioneer in that field, in that area. Yeah. I spent some time in Burgundy this past year. It was my first trip, and just completely fell in love with it. It's the food, the wine, the culture. I had my first trip to France, and while we were there, we were of course tasting and eating as much as we possibly could. And there is such a connection between land and flavor that I haven't really experienced it quite like I have there in the United States. So I can see how someone would totally fall in love with wine making and that connection to land there.
I went. We continued that connection to the Deschamps family in Beaujolais. My nephew and I went there. It was a year ago, and went and met the family. And the second generation was, the same age as what my brother would be. And that was who he worked harvest with every year. And my nephew, his name is Pascal, and he was one of the harvest interns with my brother. And we got to meet Pascal. So my brother got to meet his namesake. So here you have.
That's amazing. Yeah.
You're thinking of this huge wine industry, but it's still super small family, all on the same property, same winemaking equipment. And this past harvest, my nephew actually went and worked harvest for them. Slept in the same bed my brother did. Just an amazing commitment to tradition.
Yeah, I think people don't quite see or realize how much or how close winemaking is to family, and how it's usually family businesses producing small batches of wine that have either been there for generations or, like in your case, come back and start the tradition of it being in the family. Did your brother bring back some of those clones? Is that where you got some of your early grapes?
No, and he purchased grapes while he was living, and in kind of his pursuit of Riesling, he discovered a vineyard that was planted in the early 70s that had 5 acres of Riesling, as well as Pommard and some other Dijon clones. And when he passed away, the farmer of that vineyard asked if I would continue to buy the fruit, and I said yes. And he was also planning on selling it to my brother, so he managed, I like to say, Don suckered my husband and I into purchasing that vineyard. So Jimmy never owned his own vineyard, but now we have his favorite vineyard as part of our estate.
So winemaking it seems like it's a really tough business to make a living and be sustainable. Half your inventory is in a cellar waiting to be distributed while you're currently putting out money to nurture and create the next vintage. How, with your background in business, do you think that's really helped the business grow and be successful over the last few years? Or what are some of those challenges that you are constantly facing?
I kind of abandoned a lot of my business background in the wine industry and have really moved into the marketing and sales side. Because as I continue to explain to my husband, the numbers aren't going to look good if I'm not selling any. We grew from 2,500 cases. That's how much my brother was making, to we peaked at 27,000.
Yeah, it's incredible.
A couple of years ago, we're back down to 20,000, and that's really, really where we want to stay. So it's funny, right? Because this would have been the first year, like last year, we sold 21,000 cases, even though we only made 20. So 2020, I was excited that maybe we would do that again. And you really start to see the change in cash flow and much better ROI. And then we have the virus.
Yeah. How are you? So has that affected your business at all? I know some alcohol sales are up, some ancillary businesses on the side, cannabis sales are up. How's it affecting your business?
So, it really depends on your sales channel as a winery and your price points. And we're kind of in the middle of the road. We're not on the low end of the price scale. We're also not on the super premium end. And about 40% of our product is distributed nationally around the country. And the vast majority of that is in independent restaurants. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine that dried up.
Yeah.
30% was in our tasting room. So we have a very busy tasting room that closed on March 17th. We're actually about to have a soft opening today.
Oh, congrats.
And thanks. And we'll be reopening on Monday. So, it's a great time to reopen. It's summer. The weather's great in Oregon. The new policies and procedures have really pushed us to actually add seating and outdoor seating. So I think it's going to be wonderful. We have a lot of space, so I'm super excited about that. And then the other third of our business comes from Wine Club, and that's been super stable through this whole thing, which has been great.
Yeah, I think wine pricing is always one of those like mysteries to the consumer, assuming like the more expensive the bottle, the better it is. But that's not necessarily always the case. How are you finding your price point in such a crowded market? And I think I even read somewhere that majority of the sales are in like the $10 to $12 range.
Most of the data that you see about wine sales all comes from Nielsen. So that's stuff that's coming out of grocery stores and big box retailers. So it doesn't necessarily tend to be the less expensive product, but it is by and large. And that category is doing very, very well right now. My brother had priced his wines and really had this mission of keeping wines accessible. So we have done modest, if any, hardly price increases in the last 15 years. And part of that is an ethical thing for me because I do know what it costs for me to make a bottle of wine. Mm-hmm. And we probably work as hard as anyone. Like we keep things in super small lots, even though we make 20,000 cases, which is a lot of tank space, it's a lot of equipment. We do hold over our Pinot Noirs, a lot of them in barrel for an extra year, which again is a lot of space, it's a lot of equipment, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of labor. But I want to make enough money to survive, but I also want our wines to stay accessible. So we're touted often as a value brand because our wines tend to over deliver for the price point. And I'd much rather be on that side of the equation than the other.
I love Napa wine, but my biggest qualm with Napa wine is it's so expensive. It's hard to get like a good bottle over like $20 or under $20 and from Napa Valley because of that. Your brother really focused on creating like a biodynamic program there, and you mentioned the amount of work that it takes. It sounds like being a biodynamic winery actually would be more work than maybe a winery that embraces more, I don't want to say a factory approach, but that is less careful about the environment. That it is, I read somewhere that you practice specific vegetation, having different vegetation around the property to help with regrowth. I would love to hear like what that exactly is for you guys, what you're actually doing around that.
Most of Oregon is still handwork. It's not a lot of automated work in terms of machinery. So everybody pretty much is doing a lot of manual labor in Oregon. One of the biggest differences with biodynamics is how you control your weeds. And you can't use, obviously the Roundups of the world and those types of chemicals, nor would I ever want to. So you have to make an investment in something as simple as a tractor implement that actually can help you with your in-row cultivation. It does cost more money, of course, or you can hand hoe, but obviously labor is much more expensive than having something on your tractor. And both of those are more expensive than just using a simple chemical. And there are some additional steps that we take in biodynamics that aren't done, even in organic farming. And those are related to the different preparations that we use, that we add to the vineyard that really help with soil nutrition and plant growth. And they're all natural. So we make different things into teas. We use cow manure, organic cow manure as a type of fertilizer. So there are additional steps that we take in the biodynamic gardens. And then we're also a little restricted in terms of timing. Biodynamics is based on the celestial calendar, and it's a farming method back to the early 1900s that Rudolf Steiner started. And so you do focus on the cycles of the moon and taking appropriate actions during appropriate times of those cycles as well.
So with nature being so unpredictable, going back to even that business question where we're speaking to earlier about how do you balance between having wine sitting in a cellar growing, and then you add in the unpredictability of Mother Nature. How do you manage that? Like, that just would seem like such an overwhelming thing to always be kind of worrying about the weather, worrying about the right time to pick or harvest. How do you handle that?
We're super consistent with how we handle it, because in Oregon especially, we're fortunate in that we get a lot of rainfall during the right season. So we get a lot of rain in the winter, we get a lot of rain in the spring. More often than not, we have completely dry summers. And summer, the warmth of summers as well as sunlight are super important during the ripening phase of the grapevine, which that happens with the fruit typically during the summer. Harvest is typically where it gets the most tricky for us, just because the weather can be unpredictable in September and October. That's like the rest of the world. I mean, we just had 4 vintages that were super warm, and there's some people that love super warm vintages because their fruit gets to a certain ripeness sugar-wise, and they can pick that fruit. Our approach is, being biodynamic, not only in the vineyard, but in the winery. We don't manipulate our wines at all. So the grapes, you have to be patient and make sure that the grapes not only have the ripeness from a sugar standpoint, but more importantly, from a flavor standpoint. And that isn't a number. That is our winemaker tasting, the fruit from different sections of a vineyard before he makes that decision. And, often if you are making additions to your wine, it almost doesn't even really matter when you pick it, right? Because you can make adjustments to get it into whatever style and balance that you want. We've never done that. So for us, we have to be very patient in terms of the growing season. 2019 was a great example of that. We would have 3 or 4 days of rain, and you took a risk of waiting to the other side of the rain, but then maybe you got lucky and had 3 or 4 days of dry weather, and you could reevaluate whether or not you were ready to pick. So patience is a virtue is definitely a saying for us and how we make our picking decisions.
Yeah. I guess I don't think until I really went to Burgundy that I really understand the idea of terroir and how that impacts wines, and really tasting that. Like, I guess I hate to say it sounds so cliche, but the cliche, but the expression of the land, right? Is that a big focus for you? Just as part of that biodynamic approach, is really nurturing it so you can really get the truest expression of the land?
Yeah, in terms of approaching both the vineyard and the winery from, like I said, not manipulating anything obviously helps with that. But we also, in addition to our estate, we purchase from about 30 vineyards. And the reason that we do that is to find those different expressions, right? So we want to go find Pinot Noir on the 2 primary soil types in Oregon, not just the one at our vineyard. We want to find different clones. We want to find vines that were planted in the 70s and vines that were planted in the 2000s, because that produces a different level of ripeness. We want to find grapevines that are planted facing east versus getting the afternoon sun facing west. Different elevations make a difference. So we go out and kind of create all these small lots that end up being the palette at the end of the day that our winemaker gets to use when he gets to the point of blending. So we keep everything small and separate all the way through the process until we're ready to bottle.
Mm-hmm. You know, what I love, I think, most about wine and food is the community it builds. You know, I've so my best and most favorite memories are around family, friends, the meal we had, the wine we had. My girlfriend's always amazed about how I refer to things by the memories, by what we ate and what we drank, not by what we were actually like talking about or doing. I'm like, oh, remember? Oh yeah, when we had that one wine, or when we had this one experience at this restaurant. It's how I pretty much frame a lot of my memory. And I think it seems like really true in this case that this your winery, your wine making is a reflection or a connection to that memory of your brother. I would love for you to hear how you're sort of still honoring his legacy in your winemaking.
Yeah, so part of it from a winemaking standpoint, we really have tried to keep our approach to winemaking the same. So when Jimmy was alive and he would harvest fruit, he would use vessels of a 2-ton size. We're making 10 times that amount, or what? Is it 10 times? Yeah, 10 times the amount of fruit. We still use vessels that same size. So we haven't moved, even though we've increased production to larger tanks. And that was, because that's the way my brother taught our winemaker how to make wine. So we don't know any different, and we don't want to try anything different because that's the way Jimmy thought was the right way to do it, basically.
Yeah.
And same with that philosophy all the way through. And we've talked a lot about farming. The other thing that we've done, we had our 20-year anniversary 2 years ago, and there were 12 wineries that helped us the year my brother passed away. And so for our 20-year anniversary, we actually featured one of those wineries once a month. And we brought in their red wine and a white wine into our tasting room. So they were on our tasting flights for the whole month. And it was an amazing way just to support them, because they've always so supported me. I still feel so indebted to them, because they could have all said to me they were going to take the fruit that first year and close the winery down, and I probably would have said okay, but I feel like they gave me such a gift because their vision was to continue the winery for us. We also have 2 walls in our winery that are lined with barrel staves, and some of those barrels came from each one of those 12 wineries, and so we have their logos engraved in those barrel staves. So any guest that comes to our winery gets to see who helped us. They're on our website, and they're an amazing part of our community.
Do you have library wines? Do you have bottles from that vintage when your brother passed that you open and celebrate with to honor him?
I do. And, we don't have a lot of what he made, because when I first took over, everybody's focus was sell wine, sell wine, sell wine.
Survive, right.
Which was great, but we sold a lot of, we sold out of some completely. I had no idea that it would have been a nice gesture maybe to save some of those wines. And we do open the ones that we have on occasion. But the 2004 vintage is really special because depending on what bottle you pick, it's different people that participated in actually making the wine behind that bottle.
Yeah, I think my hardest part is always saving wine. I always have the intention. I buy bottles and nice ones, save them, and then they last a month in my cellar. And my excuse is always the occasion is opening the wine. But
every day is an occasion.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it really sounds like passion is really a part of winemaking, really a part of your business now and your role there. I would love to hear how you're blending this passion and your community at the same time. It sounds like you're honoring the community and how they came together and helped pull you in the winery through a very difficult time. But are there other initiatives that you're doing to do that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot actually. It just depends on which community you're talking about, right? Because we have
Yeah.
our local community that we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And so when we built this new winery, we knew we needed to make it a destination. And it's really become more of a lounge and kind of a hangout spot for people. And we have food, and we do this one event in the summer called Pizza Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like my favorite thing ever to see a table of growers sitting together who have known each other for 30 years growing, grapes in the Willamette Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a community that in turn supports us, right? We're there for them, but then they also are really great visitors with us. We have, right now the restaurant and sommelier community around the world, but definitely in this country is a huge part of my community in terms of my friendships. And they're all, really, really, really struggling right now. So we just launched 2 weeks ago. We make some wines with some different sommeliers, and we offered them that we could sell those through our website,
Mm-hmm.
and they could donate the funds to charities of their choice, nonprofits of their choice. So there's 4 nonprofits that we've been giving to for the last 2 weeks. Then we will continue to until those wines are sold out. From my financial standpoint, we're recovering what we would have had had we shipped those wines to the restaurants, but
Yeah.
it's the margin difference that we're donating, which feels great. We did some stuff recently too, just with the frontline workers, the Willamette Valley Winery Association. We all donated wine, and I'm not sure what the top donation was, but I know we were right up there. I donated 50 cases of wines to the workers on the front lines in the hospitals from Eugene to Portland. Wine to me is right now, I don't have cash, but I have a lot of wine. So however I can do good with my wine for people and make a difference for them, whether it's even just a simple care package, is something that we've been doing.
Wine is currency. So while I was in France this past November, I actually shot a wedding in exchange for wine. I don't usually shoot weddings, and I was a photographer for 12 years before opening up Unconquered. So it's definitely my skill set. But we were in Burgundy, and they asked me how much it would cost, and I said, how about a case and a half of wine. And, I get back to US, and I got a case and a half of wine waiting for me for some amazing Burgundy wines. And, the experiences I think you get out of drinking those and sharing those with people are way more valuable than a paycheck sometimes. But, it's also hard to say when rent's due and you got bills to pay, but, it's the priorities, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I love how you guys are really honoring the environment, really honoring the land, and the time and the people who go into making it. Both of us are part of 1% for the Planet, where we are donating part of our revenue to environmental causes. What kind of nonprofits are you supporting?
So we just picked one to start because I really wanted to see how deep of a relationship I could develop.
Uh-huh.
So we're working with Kiss the Ground,
Uh-huh.
and they're based in Los Angeles, and they're more of a media company that is out to educate and promote good farming, and when you do that, the impact it has on climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So they just released a biodynamic film, a small short one that we were a sponsor of. So I've been able to direct the money I've given them to specific projects. We're also doing a farming scholarship, and then some of it is undesignated for them to use to support their business. But it's we really match in terms of comparable beliefs about farming, of course, but they also are very heavy in education. So their website offers a lot of different educational classes that people can take. They're just launching a full-length documentary on farming that was supposed to come out on Earth Day. But they've been fantastic. They're very vocal about the farming and why you need to be doing it the right way. So it's been a great partnership.
It sounds like relationship building and people are really important to you in your business, and that's really refreshing to hear that you're prioritizing that. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, I love the idea of ethics in winemaking and pricing and accessibility. So I definitely think it's an example of how your decisions are affecting your community. And I would love to talk through, like, how you come to these conclusions. You've been in business a long time. You've had a lot of different experiences. Has it always been here, or was there a moment when you realized that this is what's important?
I've always been the type to persevere, kind of not looking that there's something I can't accomplish, well, I don't care what percent passes all 4 parts of the CPA exam at once. I can do that type of mentality. But definitely with all the loss that I've had in my life, losing my parents, I lost them 2 months apart back in 2000, and then losing my brother 4 years later unexpectedly has really made me just embrace living and being grateful for life and making decisions that feel good, I guess, at the end of the day. And, we're only here for a certain amount of time. And so to not be giving back, to not be supporting others, there's so much short-sightedness, I think, in people. And even like with this whole pandemic, it's like right now is about brand building and deepening your relationships and building loyalty. It's not about making, short-term decisions of fire selling wine. Like that's just not, I don't know. There's deeper conversations to be had all the time, but especially right now. And so I do think that that's what leads me more in how I make my decisions. I also really believe in transparency and authenticity. And that's one of the reasons I'm pretty outspoken about just certification, because in so many industries now, there's just so much greenwashing, and there's words like sustainable and natural, and they don't have definitions, and it's not helping the industry at all by not having a common denominator for what that really means.
Yeah.
And so by being certified, I love having that third-party accountability because, running a business, your priorities can get lost sometimes. And so it keeps me very focused to make sure we do the right things. And everybody knows at least at a minimum what that means. And so between Demeter, we're also a certified B Corporation, which I think has been great. And then being members of 1% for the Planet, like those 3 things for me, I think in a nutshell, kind of demonstrate who we are.
So the other 2 certifications, so just for the people at home that don't necessarily know what those are, can you run through and explain what that is?
So the B Corporation certification is really like a good business certification. It evaluates 3 primary areas of how you run your company. And it basically, once you're certified, the statement that you can make is that you care as much about your suppliers, your employees, and your environment as you do your shareholders. So it's kind of that whole concept of business as a force for good. It's a rigorous certification. As a small business, it took me 6 months to get prepared because I had to do things like employee handbooks and look at benefit structures and things that, if you're not a big corporation, you might not have some of that stuff in place.
Yeah.
There's 3,600 certified B Corps in the world, and 19 of them are wineries, and half of those are in the Willamette Valley of Oregon.
Oh, that's amazing. So it's definitely in the blood or the spirit of the winemakers in that region. And I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah. The community up there is pretty awesome.
So I have just 5 quick questions. We've been talking about some heavier things, family loss. These are 5 fun questions. We'll just break it up a little bit. So natural wines, yay or nay?
Depends on the wine.
It's a great answer. I know some of them are delicious. Some of them smell and taste terrible.
Yeah.
Are you using sulfites in your wines?
We'd make very minor additions before bottling, but otherwise not. And and we do cross flow filter, which some people who make natural wine, they don't,
Yeah.
for sure. But other than that, we follow all the principles of natural winemaking. We just make our wines in a classic style. You know, we're not doing any experimentation. We're not making blends that you don't normally see. Like, we make them in the classic style.
Okay. Best wine movie.
Best wine movie?
Yeah.
American Wine Story. Can I say that?
Of course, you can say whatever you want.
Because half the story's about Brooks.
I know. I love sour grapes.
I haven't seen sour grapes. Sideways, was interesting being in the Pinot Noir business during that. I just wish everybody would have heard his second favorite varietal in the world, and it would have had the same effect, which is Riesling.
Well, I think from our Merlot lovers, I have to imagine that it put some downward pressure in the market. People really bought into that. So maybe the Merlot lovers got a little extra value in their buys. So what's your go-to section on a wine list?
Well, I always check out to see what they have from Oregon. Not that I necessarily buy it, but I always want to see, just because that gives me some sort of an indication. When you do some of these wine certification programs and you get your 200-page book, maybe a page and a half on that is of the Northwest and possibly California, and the other 199 pages are on other regions. So it tells you a lot about whoever is buying the wine for a list, like how much Northwest wine they have on there.
Yeah.
I would say Alsace, Germany. I mean, aromatic whites and Rieslings I'm most interested in, because you can find a deep, I don't know, that's just what I enjoy. And you can tend to find just little treasures in there, because if they have a good selection of those, that the sommelier is really geeky.
Yeah, right. I've learned to never say never, and especially with wine. I think like certain grapes get a bad rap, or there's something that gets stuck to it, and everyone suddenly says, I don't like Riesling, or sweet. I don't like Chardonnay. They taste like oak. Right. And those in Pinot Noir can even fall in that category. But I think Riesling and Chardonnay grapes are some of those misunderstood wines that, it goes back to terroir and winemaking style, that they can be so vastly different. That when
it's so every varietal's grown everywhere. Like, we haven't done ourselves any favors necessarily as an industry, because there is so much experimentation. But it really, to have blanket statements about any varietal really isn't fair. Because there are great examples of every varietal.
I always take it as a personal challenge when people tell me they don't like a certain grape. I don't tell them what it is, but I've worked before this. I've worked in restaurants and bartended before, and first thing you always ask what they would like to drink, and if they ask for a suggestion, you ask what they like to drink, and they'll usually tell you what they don't like to drink. So I would always slip in one that they said they don't like, just to try and like expand that knowledge and experience with that particular grape, because it can range so drastically. Strangest pairing that you think really works?
The strangest pairing that I ever went into a wine dinner thinking there's no way this is going to work was like the simplest green salad with balsamic vinaigrette and Riesling. I just thought between the acidity and the vinegar and the acid in our dry wines and it was a great pairing.
Yeah.
Our dream pairing to do a dinner at the winery, at least for our winemaker, is to do a big old steak and an aged Riesling dinner.
Oh, cool.
That's something we want to do at some point.
I haven't had too many aged Rieslings. How do they evolve and change?
They, like a lot of other wines, right? The acid dissipates quite a bit.
Yeah.
But Riesling tends to be a high acid varietal, and so I've had wines back to the mid 40s, Rieslings that have been amazing.
Oh, that's cool.
They definitely pick up more of those petrol characteristics by and large as they age, and we love that. Not everybody does. But they aged really well. I had a really Riesling aficionado over at my house a couple months ago, and I didn't have a lot of wine here, but I always like to open older Brooks bottles for him to see where they're at. And we had a 2004, 2007, and a 2011, which was a really cool vintage in Oregon. And we both agreed that '04 was the most integrated. Like, it was the best of all of them, and that the other ones just need time. And time is hard in the market because the market doesn't understand aged wines.
Yeah.
People look at it that you're behind in vintages if you're releasing things that are older, which really isn't the case. But
I find aged wine super interesting and fascinating. It's not the easiest to always get, I would say, unless you're like in a restaurant who has a really interesting wine list. Wine stores don't typically, your average wine store doesn't typically carry it.
You got to call the winery. We're never sold out of anything.
Okay. That's the insider tip.
That's the insider tip. Call the winery and ask them what vintages they have. And if they should be able to tell you, 06 was, a warm vintage. So was 9. 11 was super cold. Like, understand your style, and hopefully they taste through them on a regular basis so they know where those wines are at.
I think one of my favorite pairings, I usually like to drink my dessert instead of like eat it. But one of my favorite pairings is having like a big Syrah or a Cabernet with like a piece of chocolate cake.
Mm-hmm.
And the combination of like the two, I think, is just heavenly. So you mentioned style a few times. And I think that's also one of those things that is misunderstood in winemaking, or at least with your average consumer. You spoke to, you're more in a classic style. So when you say that, I assume you mean like old world, maybe bringing in some of that the French influence versus like California, or, I'm not that as versed in Oregon wines as far as a collective or, style between the winemakers. Is it more New World, or how would you classify that?
Well, we like to classify it as Oregon world.
you're on your own level.
We're kind of, we do our own thing because we're almost in the middle of those two. And when I say classic, I mean, you would be able to smell one of our wines and guess the varietal. Like, there's nothing masking it. It's not being blended differently. There's not a lot of new oak. So, kind of that transparency is really what we shoot for. And I would say in general in Oregon, if you were going to compare Pinot Noir to California, you're going to have a less ripe style in Oregon. The wines tend to be more high acid, have better acid, and be well balanced.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you definitely get more of that earthiness. This is talking just in generalities when you're talking Burgundy, and maybe a little bit less fruit. And in California, you tend to get a lot more ripeness and, kind of a bigger, bolder wine.
Yeah. Do you have, outside of your own wine, do you have like a favorite, like a go-to that you love?
I have a lot, but it tends to be my friends' wines.
That's even better.
It's yeah. COVID's been good for that. Like, we've all been trading cases with each other.
That's so great.
And then we post about each other. And it's like, because we're all tired of drinking our own wine. But I really try to support my friends.
Yeah. Do you find that they're practicing the same sort of sustainability that you are? Your peers?
Some are, some aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely not to the level where I'm the only winery that I know of, even in the world, that is Demeter 1% for the planet and B Corp certified.
Yeah.
There are a few that are B Corp certified. There are some that are 1% for the planet. And there are some that are Demeter, but I don't know anyone that's done all three of those things. But I definitely lean towards people with comparable farming practices. And those tend to be smaller, family owned. The people still doing the work are the people that are still out selling the wine. And
yeah. Who do you think is doing the sustainability in the wine world really well?
mean in terms of individual producers?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I couldn't say in the world. I mean, I'm really kind of an Oregon file in terms of my knowledge with that. I mean, there's so many producers in Europe.
It's incredible.
That are biodynamic and organic, a way higher percentage than there is over here.
Yeah.
We have a nice little biodynamic community in Oregon where there's large producers like Cooper Mountain. They probably make, I'm not even sure how many cases they make, but they're a lot bigger than we are. And then there's, people like Josh Bergstrom and Brickhouse and people that carry that flag well as a small family-owned producer too. And Cooper Mountain's family-owned, but they just have a higher volume. So it's nice to see, for me, higher volumed estate vineyards actually practicing biodynamics.
You think that European respect for terroir and land and biodynamic farming is a result of the history, and the state's winemaking is relatively new in comparison. Some of these vineyards have been around for since the 1500s or before. So I'm curious how much that plays a role in it.
I would think I see that very tied to the culture.
Yeah.
Of Europe, and the fact that not everything you produce do you need to capitalize on, and that you do it more for the sake of community and family and that meal that you've had. And in the U.S., I would say in terms of number of wineries, most of them are small and are like that. But in the commercial world, very overshadowed by the high volume there's producers in California, in Washington, like a single producer that makes as much wine as the whole state of Oregon.
Oh, that's incredible. I didn't realize that.
So in those larger producers, there's no way they take the time and approach to make really pure wines. They're having to use additions and stuff. I mean, in California, you're allowed to use something called mega purple, which is just disgusting.
I've heard of it.
But it is it is in the high volume, cheaper wines for sure.
What about? When I learned about the use of egg whites and eggs in wine. I was actually working in a wine bar, an Italian wine bar, and someone was a vegan and came in and asked for a wine, and I wasn't actually sure if they could drink it. After doing research, found that it didn't have egg whites, but it was just one of those moments where something you don't really think about, right?
And egg white fining, that's usually used for fining. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it would determine you. I mean, the whole vegan wine concept is funny anyway. It's like, do you know how many bugs went into your earwigs, went into your wine, right? Like you can only get so many out of the sorting line, right? So it's kind of a funny. It's like, well, is that protein? What it really is protein. But yeah, I mean, people do different fining trials, and I wouldn't say that fining trials, as long as that doesn't result in you manipulating your wines by adding something else that's not good, is a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's more of a clarification and clarifying and focus. We don't fine at all, but a lot of people do that still make great wine.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily bad either. I think a lot of people, there's always the conception that it's just grapes in the bottle. There's not. I don't think there's always the clarity of what quite goes into the bottle, the yeast, the different yeasts, the different additives, the preservatives. So when I heard about that, I was just it was like one of those aha moments,
Yeah.
For the people at home who don't know what it's called, Big Purple,
Mega Purple.
Mega Purple. Can you talk through that? What that is?
I don't even really know. Although I know it's just a manufactured chemical that adds coloring.
Yeah.
To red wine, primarily. I think it's why they use it.
Yeah. With all your efforts in being sustainable and staying true to the land and the environment, does it ever just feel like an uphill battle for you? No, that's great.
Not at all. I believe it's the right way to do things. And our winemaker and I have kind of had this thing since we started doing this together of, if we go down, we're going to go down the right way.
Yeah.
We're never going to compromise. Even like right now, like my team is doing a soft opening for us to reopen our tasting room. And for me, it is all about safety. Like, I don't care how many tables I have to take out of my tasting room. They're going to be appropriately distanced. My team needs to feel safe. Our guests need to feel safe. And we'll do whatever it takes to have to make that happen.
Yeah. That's really admirable. I hope, as businesses reopen, they take the same sort of caution and
yeah, I do too.
That, I live in New York City, and we've been kind of decimated by this whole thing. And I love going out to eat. That's one of the reasons why I stuck around in New York City and deal with high rent, congestion, noise, is because of the access I have to amazing restaurants, wine lists that you would never get to experience anywhere else. And I'm really concerned for like the future of restaurants in New York City. And I'm really concerned that how people are going to respond when they do open, and if they're going to continue to practice the precaution. Otherwise, it will kind of feel like we just went through all this for nothing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know. And then there's layers on that, right? Like restaurants, if they don't own their own space, what's happening with the relationship with their landlords? What's happening to the landlords if they're not collecting rent for all these months? Like, how long can you do that before this whole thing starts to really crumble? And, I know a lot of people that have amazing restaurants in New York, and like, we love all the small mom and pop places.
Oh, they're the best. Yeah.
By far the best. And those are the ones hurting the most.
Yeah, we've been, I live with my girlfriend. We've been really trying to support as much as we can. But it's tough because none of them have tried to stay open. I think there was a period of time where it was kind of, I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah.
We stopped going to grocery stores and started buying produce from the restaurants themselves. A lot of places in New York City started like really pivoting to becoming like pantries, grocery stores, wine shops. We've been buying meats from the local steakhouses. We've been buying wines from the wine stores just to try and help support them. But
it's important. There's the Independent Restaurant Coalition that was formed as part of a response to this whole pandemic. Their whole position was the airlines employ 650,000 people in this country. The restaurant industry and hospitality employ 11 million people in this country. And there was not one amount of money that was specifically designated to support that industry. So there's a lot of fundraising efforts that are starting, across the community, like the Psalm Wine that I mentioned. That's one of the entities we're giving to. So hopefully, and they're really lobbying hard in DC that if there is another stimulus package, that will help. But if they're able to reopen, but they can only reopen at 50 or 25%. And the other big problem for restaurants is kitchens. How do you keep social distancing amongst your cooks? These buildings just weren't built that way to accommodate those things. And honestly, New York will probably be back one of the last markets to come back online, I would think. And it's like the longer this thing goes on, the harder it's going to be to recover from it.
Yeah, and especially in New York City where the buildings are very old. Everyone's cramped in, whether you're in a kitchen or you're sitting in the dining room.
Right.
There's just simply no space.
Yeah.
For when the restaurants do open again, where can people go in like New York City, for example? Where can people go to find your wines?
You can go to Cork Buzz.
Cork Buzz is great. I love Cork Buzz.
Yeah, we're doing some different stuff with Laura Maniac that owns it. Terroir always has our wines.
Does he carry your Rieslings? He's a big Riesling guy, right?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
He's a big Riesling guy. That's why we know each other so well.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, why is Monica's place escaping me the name of it, the retailer? I don't have a list in front of me.
That's okay. I know I put you on the spot there.
But anyone could always email me and say, where can I get your wines in New York City? Because we all know that shipping wine can be very prohibitive.
It can get expensive. From all the different wineries we visited, we have noticed that people have brought down wine shipping costs for their customers, just to try and increase business again.
Yeah.
How are you trying to connect with your patrons, and connecting, your brand to your customers?
Probably the most significant thing I think I've done is, I was just like every other consumer the first week that this all happened, getting these COVID response emails and then getting winery emails with 25% off, 30% off, free shipping. And so I sat down and wrote my weekly e-blast that week, and it was titled, "This is not your normal COVID response or winery email," because I just thought, we're all tired of that. So let's talk about something else. And so weekly for the last, I think, 9 weeks, I've been doing more storytelling. I did one on 1% for the planet. I did one about what does it mean to be a B Corp. I've done one on the story behind our label of the Runaway Red. I did one where we had Pascal come on and do a video for us and tell us what life's like in Paris. Mm-hmm. Really just trying to entertain and engage. And I got to tell you, the response has been pretty awesome. People just appreciate that they're not opening up a weekly e-blast that is all about buy my wine, buy my wine. They all know we need support. I mean, if anybody doesn't think any small business needs support right now, I don't know where they are.
Exactly.
But those have actually been super fun for me, because it's kind of been my weekly project of trying to figure out what the next topic's going to be. But that, to me, that's, and I put my email and my cell phone at the end of it, and I have for the last 9 weeks. If you need something, just call me.
That's amazing.
And it's led to doing Zoom tastings with customers that maybe I had never met, with a bunch of their colleagues. Mm-hmm. It's led to all sorts of great stuff for me to really deepen my relationships with a lot of our customers.
Yeah, I think people now are very keen or intelligent and aware of when brands are faking it, right? Or when things aren't they're tone deaf, or we've had a lot of discussions with our clients about how to talk to your customers, because I think it's right now there's a level of fear for just the current economic condition, and then there's fear of coming off as being insensitive, right? And not really being able to be aware of what's happening. And I think in that there's actually a lot of opportunity, exactly what you're saying. To connect with people in different ways.
If I get an email and it doesn't even acknowledge the crisis, I delete it. I mean, I just don't even,
What do you think is the number one consumer expectation from either your brand or from just sort of the larger, brand landscape, I guess you could say, in 2020? It's definitely changed a lot over the last just 4 months alone.
I mean, I think that people are really going to be seeking out authenticity and transparency from brands. And I think they're going to do that by, asking harder questions, doing more scrutiny before they purchase something, making more informed choices. I mean, I know I am. I just, and communication is so important and not done very well for so many brands. We just, with our soft opening that we're doing today, I had 3 focus groups with my highest frequency customers that live close to the winery over the weekend to lay out the whole entire plan. This is how different Brooks is going to be when you walk in. And they really appreciated that, instead of coming in cold. And they're the ones there today giving us a run for our money to see how it goes. But and then I'll follow up with them, after tonight, just because at the end of the day, I want people to honestly believe they felt they had a safe and great experience.
So we're getting about close to time. Where can where can customers or people out there who are listening one buy your wines and support some of the efforts that you were talking about as far as supporting the restaurant community?
Yeah, so at our website, so www.brookswine.com, under the shop section, the first thing that pops up is the Somm collection. And so all of the wines in that collection, and we'll be adding a few more. You can read through there and see what nonprofits they've designated that they want the proceeds to go to. And then the rest of the wines in the portfolio, obviously we're part of 1% for the Planet. So 1% of all of our revenues get donated to a nonprofit of our choice that's helping the environment. So.
All right. Well, Janie, well, thank you so much today. We really appreciate your time, your knowledge, expertise. I really found your story to be inspiring, especially your commitment to staying true to the people that, one, make your wine, the community that helped pull you through in 2004, and your customers. I think it's kind of, honestly, and I hate to say this, but I think it's kind of rare to find people who are as dedicated. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Of course. As always, I want to first thank you, the listener, for tuning in today and spending the last hour with us. I want to thank Janie and the Brooks Winery team for your commitment to producing biodynamic wines, your commitment to the planet, and for creating a business that supports your people.